Thank you, everybody, for joining us today. I'm so excited to have our guest here today. It's Dr. Baker. So she is the host of the Go Friend Yourself podcast. I enjoy it. I listen to it. You know, when the episodes come out, it's got that notification. I love to go on there and listen to those myself. So honored to have her today. Now, let me read you this because I think this is important for all of us, but this is for informational purpose use only. This is not a substitute for medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. So want to make sure that you guys are just using this for entertainment. But Dr. Baker, I'm so glad to have you here today. I'm very privileged to have you on here, and I love your podcast. So glad to have you here today.
Thank you. I'm so honored, Anthony. Thank you for having me. I love yours as well. So I'm glad to talk with you. I can't wait to see where we go.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And I really, you started this podcast, a couple months ago, right?
Yeah, in August, the beginning of August.
So I love it. Your episode, 13 in?
Yes, lucky awesome. 13. We made it. I know 12's the average, so it's like I'm going to go past 12. I promised myself at least past 12.
At least past 12. Well, I didn't even know that was the average.
Yeah, well, you definitely broke that. You're over 100, so my hat's off to you. That's amazing.
Awesome. So thank you so much. And
you're welcome.
Wow, 12. I didn't know that. That's good stuff to know.
Yeah.
So that's so awesome. So I was excited to, I've seen your website, and, maybe you can kind of go into the description, and like why you named, your podcast the way you did, the Go Friend Yourself, and kind of maybe explain how you've worded it. 'Cause I think that's an important piece for people to understand.
Okay. Yeah, I'd love to actually. Thank you for giving me the chance to, because I think there is, a lot of people do assume, and I don't blame them. It's how it's out there. It's Go Friend Yourself with one word. But I did think about this for a while, and I'm hoping I can still get the message across with Go Friend Yourself as two words to really reflect how important it is that we are hopefully taking care of ourselves and working towards supporting ourselves like we would a really good friend, someone we love and care about. And so I wanted the emphasis on befriending the self that is you, that is unique, that deserves attention. I think sometimes there's, a huge tendency to say, oh, I'm so busy, I'm so stressed, who's the most tired and overworked? And we're sometimes, really praised for putting ourselves on the back burner. And I think there's even a stigma attached to really focusing on you versus taking care of others. And self-care and getting to know ourselves in our own relationship like we would with a best friend is really important. So that's part of the reason I separated out your and self in the title.
That's awesome. And I think that's, kind of why I gravitated to your podcast, because, I'm sure like many people, and, I know some of my audience, we all tend to be, really focused on helping other people. And, we do ignore ourselves. And I know that can lead to a lot of different things in our backgrounds. And I know for me specifically, that kind of led to, high levels of stress and, even going through, bouts of anxiety and panic attacks and all of that. So I know that can definitely be troublesome. So I really appreciate the message that you have, because that was something that I really personally dealt with myself.
Well, as I say in my episodes, I'm right there with you, Anthony, and I am grateful that you're open and honest about this. I think there is, still a lot of awareness about how much people struggle with anxiety, depression, being hard on themselves, being self-critical, but yet we don't often see people stand up as much and say, yes, I'm one of them. And so I think the more we can do that, the more we can see we're connected. And I feel really lucky. An unexpected thing that happened when I have my private practice is I really got to see how much everyone, is so connected. We all have something. We all have strengths. We all have something that we struggle with. And that's just part of being human. There's no shame in that. And it's even really helped me grow and reflect. And my clients constantly inspire me because they're coming and doing such tough work every week. I specialize in things like anxiety and relationship issues and trauma. And, that's no easy task to work on those issues and face them. So it's like when I walk out in the world, I feel like I have a bit of a different perception, just kind of like I know how we can all wear that mask in public and smile and talk about things that we know are easy to talk about. But underneath it all, I know we all carry something that we struggle with. And so it's like you kind of peek behind the curtain and see the reality of humanity. But that's helped me feel way more, inspired and humbled, but also, connected to people.
That's so cool because I think, with like you said, there's kind of a stigma of, maybe reaching out for help. And, a lot of people kind of have issues with that. And I think, especially for when I was growing up, I've seen, some family members in counseling and all of that. So maybe I had an example of that. So, you
Wow.
know, it's kind of, for me, it was very helpful. And I think, reaching out for any kind of help, I think a lot of people look at as a weakness, but, I think it takes a lot for us to really, look within ourselves and have that answer and say, hey, I do need help. And,
Hmm.
for you to be able to get into that, this kind of path for yourself, I think it's amazing. So,
Thank you.
definitely kudos to you. And I really appreciate people like you because, you've helped me and I'm sure you've helped tons of people, and I'm sure people are so grateful for you, so it's amazing.
Oh, thank you. I'm honored. Yeah, I'm right there. We're in the anxiety club. I've got generalized anxiety, and like I've shared in my episodes, I wasn't diagnosed until I was in graduate school doing grief work, and my psychologist was like, I don't think you're just a worry wart, as many of us refer to ourselves as. She's like, this is something kind of pervasive in different areas of your life, but luckily there's really great treatment out there. So, I think the more that we can, part of my title is, to provide inspiration and information to help people accept themselves and own who they are, not just say parts of me are good for the public and the rest of me I have to hide, but again, no judgment or shame, because so many of us have done this out of a survival skill. I don't think we do anything, just out of the blue. We've learned how to cope and survive in a lot of different ways. So I always have a great respect for whatever people do to cope, even if sometimes that means at first not totally accepting themselves, because that might be painful or scary or difficult. So I know that that's a process, that's a journey. So, and you were talking about kind of putting yourself out there and being brave. So I just have to quickly plug one of my favorite quotes from, I'm a huge fan of Brene Brown, and I love how she talks about being authentic and vulnerable and courageous. She's got really great TED Talks on vulnerability, and she talks about the man in the arena, and that's a Teddy Roosevelt speech. So if any of your listeners have not read that little, blurb from the speech of the man in the arena, he did at the Sorbonne in Paris. And it's so inspiring because he's, I don't remember it exactly, but it's something like, better to be the man in the arena, marred with sweat and tears and blood rather than the critic up in the stands, unscathed. And we want to see a person who's really being themselves, not covered in armor and, impenetrable on many levels, but somebody who is willing to put themselves out there, even if they might struggle or, it's not so pretty, right? But just to be that brave person, even if the eyes are all on you, willing to put yourself out there. And so I thought that was such neat metaphors and ways that he spoke about that. So anyway, if they haven't listened or seen that one, that's a great
You're
quote.
so, great about the explanations behind everything, and even throwing out quotes. And I'm a big quote fan. I do one at the end of every episode, so I definitely enjoyed that, and the educational piece behind it, and you showing, giving people information on how to, accomplish their goals is awesome as well. So one of the things, that I saw that, on your website was that you had moved over 20 times before the age of 13. Did that really kind of influence you in the direction you went with psychology, or how did you really get into the field of psychology?
So I moved a lot of different places, and I'd be in the countryside in England. I'd be back in more kind of like city life in Southern California. And, my dad was an army brat. I'm not an army brat. And so he got used to that lifestyle, and I noticed that he loved it. And so my family would kind of set up shop in different places. We'd move around a ton. And I remember when I was little, I had an English accent after living in England for, a bit over a year. And I came back and my friends were like, why are you talking like that? And it was not like every word, but you can just kind of tell. And then it went away after a while. And then I moved back to England. Then I had the American, accent. And they're like, where are you from? So it kind of feeling like where do I fit in here? And so it was, interesting experiences, but I think I learned quickly, as I've shared, kind of how to be a chameleon. And I got good at reading people and seeing what they would like to see from me, how I can best fit in, what people are doing and wearing. And, it helped me survive, but it made it really difficult to feel like, oh, I can just show up and be me and they're going to just really like who I am. So it was something that gave me that strong message to cope and survive moving so much, of how to adapt and put my best face forward or wear that kind of mask to be accepted. And yeah, that was tough because it wasn't until I was, older and kind of in my career and seeing how I can. You mentioned how, you laugh at your own jokes, and I love that because I'm probably the one who thinks I'm the funniest. So, I've always tried to tell like dad jokes or puns, and my friends joke that I'll listen to everything from like Radiohead to hip hop to smooth jazz sometimes, and
Wow.
like they're like that's such a you thing. I'm like, oh, I have a me. Like you kind of start to see you're not just trying to emulate other people around you. And as you get older, you start to see through other people's eyes these reflections of who you are. And then, of course, through experience, they're like, hey, we like you. It's like, huh, I can be myself and be liked, even though I'm, think of myself as kind of this silly Fraggle who loves the 80s. And I don't know, I'm stuck there. Don't get me going on Alf.
Yeah.
But yeah, that was quite an experience for me. So I'm still learning that. I'm still learning to show up in my career, and putting myself out there on the podcast has been another way that I'm kind of stretching myself with my confidence. And yeah, that's been quite a journey. So there's a lot of areas where the move started it, and then life just kind of perpetuated it.
Wow. That's interesting. And it's so different in how each person kind of arrives to where they've been in life, and to see that you've gone through that yourself. And what really touches me is that kind of that chameleon, having to be a chameleon. And I think most people try to adapt to other people instead of obviously being yourself, and that's exactly probably where you got the title, right?
Absolutely. And I remember thinking, just kind of, I don't know, I'm curious if you've ever felt like this, like when you were younger and you were in school and you're trying to fit in, did you ever feel like, almost like you have to be like a certain group? I mean, I'm not going to like totally categorize like, the athletes or this or that, but just like to find your niche and kind of get along with people, that you have to emulate everything that they do or many of those things. And even though I felt like an individual, I still felt like I had to kind of project those parts. And it really blew my mind when I was older. Maybe it took me longer after moving so much and putting on so many masks, but it did kind of blow my mind. Like, yeah, I really am my own me, and there's just one me, and I already have a personality. I don't have to wear a mask. Like, there's someone here already. And so yeah, it was quite a journey after trying to fit in and move around so many places.
Yeah, for sure. And yeah, I think that's something that, I personally dealt with too, was just trying to figure out where I fit in. And, each, in high school, there's definitely each, different crowd that sits in, different parts of the cafeteria. And, so I had the same thing. And, for me, I played football, but I wasn't necessarily, popular guy, but I got along with everybody. But I felt like I kind of got along with everybody because I was able to take little bits and pieces from everybody just to kind of fit in. And looking at it now, I'm biracial, so I'm half black and half white, and I think that kind of I kind of felt lost at one point because, I was like, well, where exactly do I fit into this realm? And, I don't think I discovered that until later, that was kind of something that I had dealt with, or, that I had thought that, I had to be a certain way because I was biracial, or because of, the circumstances. So as far as the psychology, so you've gone through these things as well. And I think sometimes, as a psychologist, or, people from the outside, it's almost like we see, almost, I guess we kind of look at people in certain instances and we see, them in a certain light, like everything's perfect and things like that. But you have struggled with those same things that maybe your clients have. Do you think that that's helps you relate more and be able to be a more effective, psychologist for them and help them through that process?
I sure hope so. I mean, I remember during my training, we would talk about self-disclosure and, they would tell you, even if you're wearing a ring that discloses you're taken, or, if you have pictures up that, tells them something. And so they were saying be very cautious. And I understand there's a really important thing there. You want to watch for boundaries. You're there for your clients. They're not there for you. But I think it's, kind of going back to me sharing about like my dad jokes and love of puns and silliness. And I use a lot of metaphors like, the Tasmanian devil when we're trying to just go, go, go and we're afraid of slowing down. Or I reference Ghostbusters a lot, like trying to clear your mind of thoughts. And so I'd feel like, oh my gosh, oops, I just kind of let myself out there when I was talking to that client. But, as they kind of taught me in grad school as well, which was really helpful, is kind of the proof is in the pudding. So instead of just going in with my preconceptions and my fears of how I had to be a psychologist when I started, and hello, gosh, I can't even imagine my poor first like few years I was training those clients, because I really felt like, when you're trying to be someone, I definitely had that imposter syndrome of like, no way, I can't believe it. No way. This was my dream for like 11 years. And there's no way I'm really making this. And it's just me. I just like got through the program and, but I'd get feedback. The clients would laugh or be like, oh my gosh, that makes sense. Or wow, I love it. I just want to share. I feel like connected with you in this moment more than I have, in the last like 6 months. I'm like, oh my gosh, maybe I can just be me and show up as with my degree, but bring all of me, including, what makes me me, even though sometimes it's kind of silly or funny or whatever, I'm hoping, and that's actually led to, better connections. Cause I always share with my clients, please give me feedback and tell me what's working, what's not. I look at us as partners and, I'll bring what I know about mental health and you bring your expertise on you and what you want to work on and how you got here. And a lot of times they would share that feedback that those were some of, the more helpful moments. So just kind of trying to stay open myself and aware and grow as a psychologist. But it feels much better knowing I don't have to be this imposter now who's wearing this title. I can just be myself with my background and bring that experience, but show up as me. And I think that does help with connections because, you really have to have a great connection when you're doing this kind of tough work. It's really important.
Absolutely. And I love that you look at it as a partnership versus just you and the client, so, I think from my experience with, I've gone to, counseling or, therapy as well. And, there's just some times where you just maybe don't click with somebody. So you have to go, through that process and find somebody else as well. So I love the idea that you look at it as a partnership and, you've got your knowledge and we're going to figure out the knowledge and you bring the knowledge of you. And I don't think I've ever heard it really kind of explained like that. So I think that's a great thing.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I think, out of insecurity or ego, it's easy to kind of go into that place like, oh, I'm the expert. And life quickly teaches you, we know certain things, but if you're working with another human, you really got to be partners with whatever you're working on. And so to kind of know, it's so important to have that good connection and be on that equal playing field so that there's mutual respect and trust. It's been, I think, one of the most important lessons for me as I've become a psychologist and, just keep trying to work on my confidence in myself and figuring out the way that I will be a psychologist, not just being a psychologist, but how, what does that feel like? And yeah, that was something helpful and important for me.
Wow. It's amazing. And just, just the thought process behind it. So now people, I think a lot of people struggle, what would you say is like the first step to really understanding, or maybe even just helping, take that mask off? If people feel like they've had these masks on for so long, what would you say is maybe the first step that somebody could take?
Well, depending on how comfortable or uncomfortable they are, I think a safe step when we're trying anything new is observation of others. So, if you feel nervous to put yourself out there in this way, I do a lot of mindfulness and cognitive behavioral therapy, but with CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, we do a lot of exposure and experiments. And so one thing is if someone's really uncomfortable, they can watch someone or observe someone else who they think is authentic, for example, might be good. And then notice what happens. Do people reject them? What are your fears? So making that prediction, people will reject me if I'm my real self. They will ridicule me. I'll be open to criticism. I'll be vulnerable, whatever the fears are. And, if you go out there and really watch how people treat somebody who they think is being authentic, is that true? Do those predictions come true? But, kind of being a curious scientist, um, and being open to collecting that information, because, we can have confirmation bias, which is really interesting, which is, we kind of unconsciously choose to see things in a way that confirms our belief. So if our belief is, I am not good enough and I must be, masturbating, I must be, or I should be shooting on ourselves this way. And if I'm this way, then I'm acceptable. We might miss when a person waves at us or smiles or kind of laughs with us, because we're unconsciously looking for evidence that we aren't very lovable, we aren't liked. But that's not for fun. Again, that usually comes from somewhere. And so a lot of us can have difficult, challenging, or if not, downright painful experiences that can, start to shape our worldview in that way. So I think being really gentle and respectful, that's kind of that's a very scary thing for many people to think of, just showing up without the mask and being vulnerable and authentic. It's a process. So if you're missing that compassion and curiosity, that change I don't think will last, because you're being hard on yourself potentially. And who wants to go to someone who's, hard or cold or not very understanding for help? We wouldn't go up to another person outside of ourselves for help like that. So why would we go to ourselves if we're hard on ourselves that way, or kind of cruel with our perception or how we talk to and treat ourselves?
Wow. Yeah, it's so amazing to think that the process in ourselves and, being so hard on ourselves. I know one thing that I personally dealt with, and I think, maybe some other people deal with, is, kind of the idea of being perfect. I kind of covered that on one of my episodes, a couple episodes back, but I was so in the need of being perfect. And, I feel like I discovered a couple years ago that, nobody can be perfect, and we all have flaws. And we all, need, maybe just embrace those, not necessarily need to embrace the flaws, but I think, getting comfortable with those. What would you say is, the best way to kind of, or perfectionism? What is your thought on perfectionism?
Well, as I don't know if you've heard me, but I've referred to myself as a recovering perfectionist, because that's definitely how I went about trying to feel like I could get through grad school. And so, I think, yeah, absolutely. It's first for any kind of change is that awareness of how we are acting or being, and, how we're treating ourselves, how we view ourselves. And then I think the second step is, instead of going right to, I talked about my blog posts, like something like more Sherlock and less Judge Judy, right? If we can go, instead of like gavel over our head, judging ourselves like, oh my gosh, I can't believe I'm this hard and this perfectionistic. And now that I'm aware of it, I can't believe I'm still doing it. And I didn't just stop and change already. It's like, no, that's not how it happens. So, to notice it is one thing, but then also to invite some curiosity, like, I wonder what perfectionism does for me. Because I always tell clients, this is something that's coming up over and over. And if it's happening over and over, there must be a reason, a good reason. Because if it's hard for you, if it makes you stressed or suffer, but you keep doing it, there's got to be a really good reason. So whatever that reason is, trumps, the thing that happens that's hard to deal with, like the stress and anxiety from telling ourselves we have to be perfectionists. See, look, I didn't say a word perfectly. And I think that right there, finding out for you, I think for many of us, it can be avoidance of feeling like we're vulnerable or criticized or maybe conflict. But finding out for you, what is that thing that perfectionism does? It's funny, I'm actually recording an episode about that right now. And it really can be armor. It's like, if you can do everything 110% or 150%, it's like that gap between the 100% that's great and that extra 10 or 50%. It's almost like a magician doing, redirection. Like, look over here. Don't look at me. Look how amazing I am, and look at how much extra I'm doing. Look at that extra 10 to 50%. And I think we can start to feel safe with layering on how much we think we do things, to an incredibly perfectionistic extent that causes so much stress, though.
So one thing that I found interesting, and you say this in your podcast, and I really enjoy it, is the masturbating and shooting on yourself. Could you kind of explain that to my audience that maybe hasn't listened to your podcast?
Sure, absolutely. So, yes, and that is shoulding, Shoulding. And masturbating, it's, the kind of humor we use in CBT therapy to help people slow down and start to recognize how they're talking to themselves because it has, think about it. When you walk away from an interaction with somebody, we can really feel, lifted up or maybe feel down. And we're in our own head. So we hear, or sometimes we don't even notice, many times we don't notice, but we hear so many of our own thoughts and they're usually about ourselves. So as I've mentioned, before in my episodes, they think up to 70,000 thoughts a day.
Wow.
And yeah, many are on repeat, like a broken record or what I call the hamster wheel of hell in our head sometimes. And they can be really negative. And, a lot of times I'll sit there with clients and just repeat when they say something that's really, hard on themselves and they don't realize it. And sometimes they're really shocked. I've had clients just get quiet and start to cry. And they said, I said that about myself. And so it's interesting. Sometimes I'll say, can we just today, if you say should, can I just reflect it? And, it's interesting to see how much we say that. I'll say, oh, you should do this. You should do that. You should have done that. You shouldn't do this. There's a lot. And it's like, what would it be like to say, I want to, I'm working on this. There's so much pressure and then sometimes self-judgment or shame if we're not doing all these things we think we should do. And so it can be a really interesting thing just to notice for a day or even an hour how often we should on ourselves, how often what we call masturbate. I must do this. I must do that. And then also to understand the pressure behind it. Like, where is this coming from? What are you afraid will happen if you don't do these things? Because often when we are shooting on ourselves, we are trying to avoid something. And it's not just this want that we own. I think should connect sometimes to more pressure or even in some cases fear. Like, well, if I don't do this, then, I really should otherwise. And so we can really start to create a lot of pressure in our own head. We're not even aware of it sometimes.
Yeah, it's funny. I also, I catch myself saying those same things. So since I've started listening to your podcast, I catch myself saying those same things. And I know growing up that was, kind of language that was kind of buried into me from, my mom and, even, maybe my grandparents, and that kind of came from them. Like, you always had to live by these certain expectations. And, I think that was something that, I caught myself doing too when I heard that on your podcast. I was like, wow, I do say that a lot. And it does take, as I've started to really recognize it more, I feel that release of the pressure that I'm putting on myself. So I definitely would recommend that as an exercise if you guys are doing that to, kind of, catch yourself doing it and, relieve that pressure. I think that's important. So thanks for that practice. It's helped me personally.
Oh, I'm so happy to hear that. Yes. I'm trying to practice what I preach as well with, I'm doing it myself. And again, it doesn't mean that reminds me of just the importance of balance because it's, we can try and, especially with anxiety, we might seek a lot of kind of black and white thinking. It's this or it's that. And only this is good and that is bad. And, never should on yourself. And I think it's okay. It's just noticing if something is happening to an extreme. It doesn't mean we eliminate the word should forever. But if something's happening to an extreme where it's causing a lot of stress, just being able to notice that, again, with some curiosity, hopefully, and some compassion, and then kind of reel it in a bit and try on some new language because it really does impact how we feel about ourselves.
Yeah, that's it's such a great practice and understanding, and you talk about mindfulness and how that kind of affects our life. And now, one thing that I recognize too is that a lot of people kind of compare themselves or their lives to others. I'm sure you probably see that maybe often. So what would you maybe recommend for people that have that kind of pressure that they put on themselves?
Yeah, it's on my list of a podcast episode I want to do because I feel like it can be in two different main ways of, I'm not as good as so-and-so, or I don't have it as bad as so-and-so. So who am I to have compassion for myself or who am I to feel bad for myself? And kind of back with the first one, I'm not as good as so-and-so. I think that can include even our past self or who we think we will be, our future self. And I think it just takes away from our ability to be in the moment. And like you were talking about mindfulness, to accept right now what's going on and who we are. And, Kristen Neff's a great researcher on compassion, and she talks about that fear right in the beginning of her book. That fear that, oh, if I have compassion for myself, if I care about myself, I focus on my struggles, that's going to take away from my ability to care for others, or, yeah, that you don't have it as bad as other people. So who are you to do that? And she really shares that it's kind of the exact opposite. The more we can connect with ourselves and understand how, as humans, we suffer and struggle with things, the more I believe it opens and grows our heart to recognize that in others. So we, I think, become more compassionate and more connected. But a lot of times that fear is there and it just blocks us. And sometimes, again, trying to understand where these things come from, if that effectively blocks us from our pain, sometimes we say we don't deserve it, but it also can be, from what I see, that we feel nervous that we can't, or afraid even, that we can't handle what feelings we might connect with if we actually allow ourselves to slow down and really feel what we're feeling. That's why I have this artwork in my office. It's a, see, I got excited. I just hit the microphone with my hand. Sorry.
No worries.
It's a bunny on a snail, and it's holding the reins. And it's like, I think this represents how I know I've felt before, and how I know a lot of my friends and clients can feel. Like, I just want to keep going and going, and I do not want to slow down. What will catch up with me, and what's going to happen? So I just stay really busy. So that's, like I talked about in that human doing versus human being. I mean, we really can get sucked into that kind of way of life to cope.
Absolutely. And, one of the things that I think when I first started kind of discovering these same things that you've talked about, the comparisons, the kind of perfectionism and dealing with my anxiety and, the panic attacks and all these kind of things that were going on, I think, I don't think that I really realized how much time, or even gave myself enough time, at the beginning stages of these things. I think I wasn't very patient. So, can you kind of give us maybe like a breakdown of that process and that the time? Because I think, I'm not an expert on it, and I know that you probably, obviously, that kind of field. So what would you say about time and, kind of the recovery process in this?
Yeah, thank you for the opportunity to talk about that, because I do think it's helpful for people to really understand change absolutely takes time. And it's kind of, it's not from point A to point B. And I always think of it as kind of like a cycle where, you start at one point and you move forward, and then you slip back, and then you learn something from that, hopefully. And then you move forward again, trying to, put that into practice, and then you slip back. But people feel like, oh gosh, look, I'm back at square one. I wanted to make these changes. Now I'm aware of it, but I failed to enact that in my life and keep this up. Well, if you really could fast forward time and look at it, it kind of looks like, to me, a spiral moving forward, and you're not ever going back to square one. Every time I think we learn something and do move forward. So change can, take time. And as we learn from it, though, I think it's never going back to square one. We're always growing. And so I do think there's a tendency that sometimes we wake up and go, oh, wow, I really want to make this change in my life, and think that awareness in our mind translates to an emotional and behavioral change instantly, or quickly at least. And again, that is where we end up being so hard on ourselves. Like, how am I aware of this thing I want to do differently, and I'm still not doing it? Why am I not waking up earlier? Why am I not going to the gym, cutting back on drinking, whatever it is, being kinder to myself, being kinder to others? Whatever you're working on, it's a really tough point. And I think that's where most of what I do in therapy is someone comes in and says, I want to change, and here's where I want to be, but I don't know how I'm going to get there. And right now it's hard to be here with a state of awareness, but without the change in my life that I know I'm working toward. And that, I think, is truly where kind of Go Friend Yourself came from, because it's not just about learning this and using CBT and mindfulness. Those are important and incredible tools. But if you don't have this kind of mindset that you deserve the time, you deserve the care and attention for growth, then that change is really painful or impossible, I think, sometimes. I mean, we really got to be our own greatest source of support, because we're the ones in our own skin making these changes. So without that, I don't know how far we can really get.
For sure, and I think that's a big piece, and the time, and I know for me, it took a little bit for me to, kind of maybe just take the ego out of it and say that, hey, it's okay that I've taken steps back, and I'm going to continue on this journey and get better from here. So I definitely can attest to maybe just taking the myself out of it and saying, hey, I got this, and having that confidence.
Absolutely. And I don't know if when you said taking steps back, if you meant like you felt like you're going backwards or taking steps back to observe. What did you mean by that?
I think maybe a combination of both. I think sometimes,
Mm-hmm.
I was so hard on myself that, I would
Mm-hmm.
take steps back, and, I think part of it, a lot of what I had to do was reflect on previous behaviors or previous thoughts, and, kind of getting past that. But if I, sometimes I would, take some steps back, and I would, start being so hard on myself again.
Mm-hmm.
And I had to, I guess, reflect back and say, hey, it's okay. It didn't take you, 30 minutes to get like this. This was, a thing of, almost 20 something years that these habits and these behaviors form. So, to kind of stop being so hard on myself.
Yeah. I mean, think about what you'd say to a best friend or, any loved one in your life, especially like if people have kids, they can think about, because usually we're so, compassionate with kids, right? And
Mm-hmm.
if you think, would you say, oh my gosh, I can't believe it. You tried to make this huge change in your life and you went back to your old ways, or it's taking you a while. Like we usually don't talk to people like that, but yet
Right.
we absolutely talk to ourselves like that. And so the way we perceive it, the way we talk to ourselves is important, and the way we perceive things is so important. Because what would it be like if every time, you worked on a change, you saw it not as taking steps backward, but getting one step closer to what will work for you, since that didn't. You've just eliminated something else. It's like Thomas Edison working with light bulbs. And, I think that finding that way to kind of know it's all growth. It doesn't mean that we fail if we don't go straight from A to B, or if it takes time, or we have to kind of get messy with it or creative. It's all part of discovering. It's kind of like again, that black and white thinking, like, well, this wasn't it, this change didn't work, so I failed. It's like, I don't think you failed at all. You just eliminated one thing that is absolutely going to get you closer to finding out that one thing that will work for you.
Yeah, and I think that breakthrough, that it's rewarding, and I think sometimes we're so quick to rush for that reward, that we do miss some steps, but just know that we can make it through it. And I think that by you sharing this experience and explaining this to people, I think that can really help a lot of people. And I think with the podcast and what you're doing has been really amazing. And like I said, there's a lot of things that I gain from it as well. So I definitely appreciate everything that you're doing, and keep up the amazing work. And I know my audience would love this. So if you haven't
Oh,
checked
thank you.
out Dr. Baker's Go Friend Yourself, you've got to. I want
Thank you. Thank
so
you, Anthony. If I can just quickly just say,
absolutely.
truly, I love your podcast as well. And, my hat is off to you, and I'm grateful that you're so honest. It sounds like you're a great friend to yourself, and you're really someone who's owned who you are, so that you can, truly show up and share. Here's the reality of things, and here's where I struggle, and here's how I've gone to therapy, and here's my anxiety. I mean, I think I love that. That's so wonderful, because then people know they're not alone, and we aren't. Everyone struggles with something. And so now your struggles can inspire someone. I think everyone listening, if they have a struggle, that can inspire someone as well. So thank you so much. It's been such an honor to be on your show. I love your podcast, so I'm so excited to be a guest. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much, and thank you so much for the kind words. And can I enjoy that people can outreach, and you're touching people's lives. And I think that was a big thing for me to start my podcast, was to use my experiences that I've gone through, and kind of be vulnerable, because that was something I've always struggled with myself, and let people know the experiences, so that maybe we can make some difference in the world. And I appreciate you going out there and doing that for people. So
Same to you. Thank you.
thanks. So how can people find you, or like, I know you have a website, so where can people
Hmm.
find you and your podcast?
Thank you. Yeah. So I'm on Twitter as Dr. Baker, PhD. It's Dr. without a period, Baker, PhD. And then my podcast, I'm on, a lot of the podcast players. You can search Dr. Baker. That's probably the easiest way. Or you can search Go Friend Yourself. And remember, yourself is 2 words. Or you can also just visit my website and everything's on there. It's gofriendyourselfdoc.com. And doc is DOC. So hopefully, I would love to get to know your listeners too and invite them over to come listen and to connect with them as well on social media.
Absolutely. I love what you do. And I know that, if you're a fan of this podcast, you'll definitely be a fan of Go Friend Yourself. And I would strongly recommend it. And I thank you so much for being a guest. And I appreciate you taking the time for being on here. And, I know my audience is really going to enjoy this information. So let me leave you with this one more time. So this is for informational purpose use only. And this is not a substitute for medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. But Dr. Baker, thank you so much. And I really appreciate you.
Oh, thanks, Anthony. It was a blast.
Awesome. So Breathe Motivation, I'm so glad that you guys could join us. I really appreciate your time. I know these episodes run a little bit longer than the daily, but I know from the feedback I've gotten, you guys really enjoy getting the value from our guests. So I definitely appreciate that. And I will see you guys tomorrow for our regular daily show on Thursday. So you guys have a great rest of your day and go check out Dr. Baker's Go Friend Yourself. So I'll see you guys tomorrow. Thanks.